Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining me on this lovely Saturday. We're about to have all the cold in the world descend on us from Canada. And before I go any farther, I want to say how much my heart goes out to those of you in the LA area, everyone affected by the wildfires there. That's a terrible situation, and I hope all is well in your part of the world. Is sound and video okay? Everything looking, sounding all right? Well, get the lead out. If it's less than 720p, it's kind of look kind of crappy, and I'm shooting this stuff for the stream in HD, so it's nice. Yeah, it's just crappy quality underneath 720. It's not about so much what I look like, but when I let you hear things. Hey, Valve Amp Hobby Shop. I will answer your question a little bit. I'm gonna get to start the questions, and yours was the first question already. Please only ask one question at a time, or ask only. If you're gonna ask a question, you can ask many questions. Ask each of them just the once, please. Before we get started, I want to talk about guitar reviews and gear reviews in general, and how my approach kind of differs from other channels, because I'm going to be doing a review on this K-line. Been working on it, getting it together, and there's always the temptation as a reviewer to really do a fantastic video, all kinds of cool shots and light playing just so, and lots of basically cinematography. And the issue with that is that you find yourself trying to please whoever provided the gear. The model out there seems to be, for most of the review channels, that someone gives them a guitar or pays someone to do a review, and in return, especially on the bigger channels where they have multiple camera setups and all that, they get a promotional video that would cost them $10,000 or more to have made. And they get it for the price of a guitar, which is a lot less than the selling price, or just $1,500 or whatever it is. And then you get into relationships with companies, and you want to please them and all that. Well, I'm not doing that. K-Line asked if I would review this because they like my reviews, and I met Chris, and I picked up this guitar, and I said, yes, I'll review it. He offered to give me some pickups, whatever. I said, no. If I like them, I'll buy them, and I'll either send this guitar back. Actually, there's a local guy who might buy it before it gets home. It's a really nice guitar. But he won't have any input into the video. He'll see it or have input on it the first time it goes live. So when you guys do, I'm not being paid for it. I'm not keeping it. I'm not asking for anything. And I will try. My goal is to tell you as much as possible about the guitar if you don't have a chance to try it yourself. Not to make it look sexy, though, it's a nice looking guitar with the charcoal mist and all that, or charcoal frost. So I will try to show close-up shots to show how the frets are done and how the fretboard edges are rolled, and details about the tremolo and how that works and all that fun stuff. But I'm not going to be trying to sell the sizzle. I'm going to be talking about the steak and whether it's done properly. And it's a fine line. So when you see that video coming out, know that when I have not done glamour shots of the guitar, so to speak, it's for a reason. I'm trying to show you a real-world evaluation, and anything that you see on YouTube, you should try yourself whenever possible. But it's very nice. I'm playing through that restored, finished 69 Princeton right now. And I'm just really, it's not a very sexy guitar. It is just a very comfortable, good sounding guitar. I don't have any niggles about it. Hey, Victor. Aloha. It is a K-Line Springfield. So full review coming soon. And I'm going to break it up into two videos. One is going to be the review of the guitar itself, and you'll get to hear Logan, I think, play kind of clean stuff for the thing. Yeah, a 10-inch radius on this, Brad, though he does everything from 7.25 up to 12, I believe, and you can choose your neck thickness. This one's pretty thin at the first fret, about 0.83. But and then I'm gonna do a second video, and I've already shot that with my buddy John Whittemore playing this guitar with its K-Line 64s against his Nash, which has some Lawlers, and an old 83 Fender, which has Freelands. All of them is let me turn off the gate on the vocal now that I'm not going to be playing. Sorry, yeah. Still playing around with that. When I'm playing, the gate is great because you don't hear this mic. But if there's any of my voice being picked up from that mic on the amp, it'll cut out my vocal. That shouldn't be happening anymore. Sorry about that. Anyway, so we're gonna have a second video where you get to hear the K-lines and the Lawlers and the Freelands into the same, in that case, 65 Princeton and a 59 5E3. So I think that's going to be fair. You'll get to know about the guitar and all the specs and what it feels like and what it sounds like, and then you'll get to hear that guitar against comparable guitars with comparable pickups, and there is no best. I'll give you a sneak preview. The Freelands sound great. The Lawlers sound great. The K-lines sound great. You can't go wrong with any of them. So sorry about that. The trouble with testing all this is I don't hear it until I do it on playback because, the only thing I would hear if I even had headphones on is I'd hear myself in my voice. If I were engineering for myself, it'd be easy, but to self-engineer is tricky. Anyway, let's get to the questions, the amp questions, and then we'll. If anyone has any other questions about the K-line or how I do the gear reviews, I'll be glad to answer them as we go. So let me scroll up down now to the top ones. And the first question that was asked, though it's not the first question showing in the stream, the questions asked before the stream starts get jumbled in order. But the Valve Amp Hobby Shop asked, my friend's early 70s Super Reverb has an intermittent weak sound and cuts out at times. He says the sound comes back when he taps on the cabinet. What would be a good place to start? Well, that sounds like a classic description of a broken or loose solder joint. And it could be any solder joint. It could be multiple solder joints. The three most common things to check in an old Fender, and I've shown this in the two twin reverb videos a couple days ago. The first of the two on the twins. You need to check that all the horizontally mounted resistors, like the 100 ohm in a Super Reverb, from the phase inverter tail to ground, those horizontal resistors, as the board waves over the years, they pull out. That's very common. The other thing, which I show in that video, is that the cathode connections from the board to the brass control strip often pull loose from that solder joint, and they can be sitting in place, but as things flex, it'll cut out. And the third most common is a heater joint, solder joint. It could be anywhere in the heater string, but you'll have where the wire is physically sitting in the hole of the pin on the tube socket, surrounded by solder, but it has broken free, and over time corrosion has built up within that hole. So it's like, sorry to be graphic. Here's the hole in the solder joint, and I'll use two fingers for a more abrupt experience. The wire is sitting there, but there's a gap around it, and it fills with corrosions, and over time it'll cut in and cut out. And that's the thing, just to reflow all that. But it's most likely just a broken solder joint. Once you find it, it is a very easy thing to fix. Phil and Catherine Muzia. Hey, good afternoon, Phil and Catherine. Does a 65 Princeton Reverb require rebiasing after changing the rectifier tube? It depends. Everyone's favorite answer. In theory, if you're changing out a GZ34 for another GZ34 or a 5U4 for another 5U4, no. In reality, sometimes one GZ34 does not have the same voltage drop as another GZ34. But most of the time, if you swap rectifier tubes with the same tube type, you don't have to rebias. If you go from a 5U4 to a GZ34, yes, you probably should. In general, you're probably going to be okay without, even if you change tube types. But it's for the best performance, if you change rectifier tube types, you should. In general, as long as the tube type is the same, you don't have to. Might be recommended just for optimal sake, but as far as safety, no. Hey, A. Joseph 86, he asked what are, or she, I don't know what A stands for, but Joseph might be the last name. What are must-do changes for reliability and time for the AC15C1? That's the custom, not the custom classic. Recently got one for playing live. Really, and this is really optional, because the stock 470 ohms are quite a bit better than the 100 ohm screen grid resistors used in previous models. In stock form, the custom series, the 15 and the 30, not the 10, not the 4, but the 15 and the 30 are very well designed amps. You probably won't have to do anything to make them more reliable. Make sure all the hardware is tight. If the input jacks come loose, you can get noise and stuff or have intermittent signals. That's the easy thing to tighten them. You can just tighten just past finger tight. When one comes in, I do change those 1 watt 470 ohm screen grids to 1 kilo ohm. To 1 K. I can't talk today. From 470 ohm to 1,000 ohm, so 1K, 2 watt resistors, which is total peace of mind, and is, a measurable improvement, but it's not something which has to be done. The biggest thing you can do if you have a brand new AC15C1 is just to make sure all the jacks are tight, make sure all the jacks and pots are clean, and make sure you have good tubes, because the tubes they come with are not fantastic, and they have been shipped 2,000-3,000 miles before you get them, with all the vibrations entailed in that. But they're really nice amps. At that point, change out the reverb tank, maybe, because the Beltons kind of suck. But Vox is far from the only company using those crappy Beltons. Thanks, James Music Products. I appreciate that. Could I comment on the harmonic content of the various forms of phase inverters? Do some generate even harmonics while others odd? Do they affect the harmonic content at all? Well, that's not a tricky question. There are 3 kinds of phase inverters that you're most commonly going to encounter in guitar amps. Let's say 4. I'll throw in a bonus. The bonus one would be in a single-ended amp like a Champ. It's not a phase inverter, but it is the last. It is the last tube before the output tubes. And if you change that in terms of going from a AX to an AT, you can trade off distortion but get a more efficient, clean sound pushing the V6. That's really its own topic, though. Historically, the first one that people would have encountered in a push-pull power section, Class AB, would be a paraphase. And the paraphase takes the output of one triode of the phase inverter and sends that signal to one of the output tubes or one side of the output tubes, but also sends the same signal through a voltage divider to the input of the second triode. So the second triode is getting the output of the first triode, and you just turn down that level with the voltage divider so that the output of that second triode is about the same level as the first triode's output, but out of phase. So you get, the phase is inverted. And that's an interesting sound. The issue is that the first triode adds whatever compression and harmonics it adds, and then you're taking that signal, which has been amplified with certain characteristics, and you're running it through the second one. which then adds another level of that. So if the A side, let's say that let's say that the harmonic content is chocolate sauce. So the A side gets a certain amount of chocolate sauce, and the B side gets twice as much in the process. So you can get very different amounts of coloration between the push and the pull, and that really affects the harmonic content, and you get a lot of compression out of that because the signal going into the first triode tends to compress, and then the signal going to the second triode is an already compressed version of that, which compresses more. So that's the least transparent, and was not used very long, and it's not very common to encounter these days. The second type is the cathodiene, and that's very common. You find it in the 5E3 Deluxe. You find it in the Princeton, the one that you were just hearing. And that one is complicated in that you're taking one triode, and you're taking the signal off the plate, and you're taking a different version of the signal off the cathode. And it is more efficient than the paraphase, but has probably the most coloration of any of the phase inverters that we typically use, because what value you use for the plate and what value you use for the cathode resistor. And there's a cathode resistor, there's a tail resistor, and I'm not going to get into those weeds on this. But that's where you can really generate a lot of second-order harmonics out of the phase inverter. And that if you see the Tweedledee, the Dumble thing, that's what he is doing on that. There are other considerations with local negative feedback that you can incorporate into the cathodiene phase inverter. And there are things you can do to improve the behavior of the cathodiene phase inverter, because the cathodiene phase inverter is very subject to grid clamping and nipple distortion, and generally sounding squashed when pushed really hard. If I were to really crank this Princeton and grab one of my Gibsons, it would sound kind of ugly compared to, say, a deluxe reverb being pushed to the same amount. And that's due to the coloration of the cathodiene. But the cathodiene has the advantage that you only need to have one triode to have a phase inverter, so that's why it's often used in less expensive amps historically. The third is called the long-tailed pair, or the Schmidt, and that is, in theory, the most transparent and most efficient of the common phase inverters. We're going to leave the Ampeg things out with the cathode followers. Just leave that out of the conversation for this, because you won't run into that in too many guitar amps. But the Schmidt or long-tailed pair in general is going to be the most efficient. Now you can optimize it for gain or for voltage amplification, or you can optimize it for current amplification. So like I've got a 58 basement over there, the 5F6A, and that was that was an AX7, and that was optimized for voltage amplification. So you're getting some gain from that stage. And that's what Marshall had copied and what Marshall uses to this day. And Vox's is very similar to that as well. But later, Fender changed that to using an AT7, and they changed the circuit to be more optimal for the AT7. And that's what you'd find in this 65 twin reverb behind me. And that is a very efficient thing with the 12 AT7. But it still has a little bit of coloration. Later, Fender further optimized that stage for the 12 AT7, and it has very little gain. Very little gain, very little voltage amplification, but a lot of current amplification. So you get a 76 twin, and as a reason that in combination with the ultralinear output transformer, it can be 135 watts versus 85 watts, and that's a pretty sizable difference there. So, yes, they do affect the harmonic content at all. In general, we're supposed to design phase inverters to be transparent. In reality, that's almost impossible unless you want to spend a lot of money on that. And even if you were to tweak it and make it perfect, as soon as someone changes the tube, all your math and planning can go out the window, because in theory you want to say this triode's got a gain factor of 100, this triode's got a gain factor of 100. Well, no, triodes aren't perfect like that. This one might be 95, this one might be 110, and the next one is different. So you find the thing that works for you and just play. Hey, Jimmy back. Thanks for hurrying back. If you're building a Marshall-style build and you have the choice to use radial caps like Nishikon, you absolutely should use them instead of old can caps or any axial caps, because the can caps and the axial caps will not be on the market 10, 15, 20 years from now, and they are going to get more and more expensive, and they are not as good a capacitor as the current modern radial caps. A Nishikon rated for 12,000 hours at 125 degrees is a better cap by every standard than a Mallory or an F&T or a Drake or a Dagnall. Or not, those are transformers. What are the anyway? The blue caps in old Marshalls, whose name will occur to me as soon as I watch this video back and say, why didn't I say that? They're just better. The entire industry is going to them. So all the research and development is going to them. And a cap this big is a much better cap than an old cap this big. It's just the way of the world. So yes, if you have the choice, do that. If you're going to sell the amp, you have to tell people because you've got to do customer education. But if it's for you, you'll know that you've got the best possible choice. Get the lead out. Hey, how damaging can soldering without a heatsink be to electrolytics and polycaps? It would seem to be a best practice to avoid that with high heat. It seems to be best practice to that most avoid by being quick with high heat, given how little I see them used. Well, in theory, you're absolutely correct. We should heat sink all components before applying heat. In reality, I very rarely do that. If I have an amp that comes in and it's got one of those, what are they called? Not polyester, not polypropylene. The little picofarad value caps that are like silvery and clear, whose name escapes me right now. Anyway, those things are really sensitive to heat, and I'll use a heat sink on that. In general, I'll just take a pair of pliers and hold it. If something with a sturdier lead, I'll use the actual hemostats, but generally I'll just hold it with the pliers. Not silver micas, Brad, but there's polyester, there's polystyrene, the little polystyrene caps. If those get hot, the value goes out the window. But in general, I don't. I work very fast, and I work at high heat, which seems counterintuitive, but if the hotter your iron is and the faster you're able to work, the less that heat's going to go up the leads. So, I did not use heat sinks on these caps when I installed these yesterday. But if you notice the length of the lead between where the cap body is and where the solder is applied, that really helps. And now if I had a very tight, cramped situation here, like you would find on, say, the Vox AC30 hand-wired series, where I'll use this battery for my camera. If this were the capacitor and the turret was right here, and so you'd have like 1/8 of an inch of lead coming out, those I'll get out the hemostats. I've got the hemostats in my not everyday toolbox, and I'll clamp those on those leads. So there's a time and a place, but it's not, unless you're doing satellite work for NASA, you don't have to use them all the time. If you have good tools, the right temperature, and the right technique. Hey, Ike Stoddard, 5x5. I've been meaning to look up what that means for like 30 years now. Let's see. Hey, Martin. Regarding Fender Reshamps, have they ever responded to me on my improvements or modifications? No, they don't care. There are other companies that do. I know that Vox, at least one guy at Vox has been watching my videos, and they've implemented some of those changes. And I know that I can't remember his first name. I apologize. Is it Michael Swart? Swart Amps incorporated the depopping solution I found for their atomic space tone with the boost switch, and a few other companies have incorporated things, including Tone King, with my findings on the problems with their PCB on the Sky King. So there are companies that are responsive, and there are companies that are making too much money. They're rolling around their vaults like Scrooge McDuck. They don't have time to watch videos like this. Speaking of Scrooge McDuck, Richard Namagitsu said, "I like the duck to my left. Curious about it." Well, a very nice man who brought me about 10 vintage Fenders in the past year to work on, sent me this lovely duck, and it's a multi-purpose duck. And I don't think I should necessarily need to say what the multi-purpose is, but I think it's nice to have handy. I wish I had this on hand when trolls come to the channel. Duck U. It's the first time in history that your phone actually typed what you meant. So it's just going to live here for a lot of these streams, I think. And if anyone asked something particularly awkward, they can talk to the duck. Let's see, where were we? On a Plexi build, is there any downside to bridging the grids on V1 and eliminating 2 inputs? Not really. The real downside is that you are going to load your pickups more, which happens anytime you bridge 2 inputs, because you're going to have input impedances of 500K rather than 1 meg. Of course, if you have a buffer pedal ahead of that, it won't matter at all. Or if you're going to do that permanently, you can always just use use a 2 meg resistor per grid leak. And this takes you back to your input impedance of 1 meg, kind of, sort of. It's also in parallel with the grid resistance to ground of the tube, and it gets complicated. The real answer is, if you're always running into 2 inputs, it'll be slightly less bright, which can be a good thing with a lot of Marshall designs. It's a very easy thing to try, and if you find it gets too dark, change the 1 megs on the inputs which would be grid leaks per grid. V1A, V1B traditionally. Just change those 1 megs to a 2 meg, and you end up back with a 1 meg input resistance. Pretty much. Close enough for rock and roll, which I suppose would be the purpose of such a thing. Hey, Louis Sherwin. Thanks for joining us. He's got a Tweaker 15 that suddenly stopped making any sound. Since I don't have any spare tubes, I swapped the effects loop 12AX7 with the preamp to 12AX7. It started working. Bad tube. Yeah, you got lucky. You need to get another 12AX7, or I'd buy 2 at least to have another spare at least. But yeah, yeah. Oh wait. So you just swapped them. You didn't take a bad one out. Huh. Since I swapped the spare tubes, I don't have any spare tubes. I swapped the effects loop 12AX7 with a preamp 12AX7. It started working. Bad tube. Huh. Swap them back and see if the sound stays with you. It's possible that one of 2 things happened. That you had some other issue that just coincidentally went away when you swap the tubes. The other thing it could be is that I believe the effects loop 12AX7 in a tweaker is a cathode follower stage, and it's very possible that whatever tube was in the cathode follower stage, the effects loop, was unhappy with the voltage on its cathode, but it was fine with the very low voltage, typically like 1 to 2 volts, using the preamp section. And so the tube that was in the preamp is fine with the cathode follower voltage in that effects loop. So that's if it is the case that tube 1 and tube 2 don't work, but tube 2 and tube 1 do work, that's the logical explanation there. But yeah, whatever tube was in your phase inverter position, I'm sorry, not phase inverter, effects loop position that stopped working until you moved it to V1 is probably on its way out. And it can handle the lower plate voltage in the preamp, but it can't handle the voltage found in the phase inverter. The effects loop driver. Go ahead and swap it out for just to be sure. It's always nice to know that everything's as good as it possibly can be, because if it's going to go out, it'll go out when you're on a gig. Hey, Ike, you did not tell me that you got a late 70s, early 80s Music Man. If you send me the chassis, would I go over the fine-tooth comb? My input queue is pretty full up right now. It's going to be at least 2 months before I can take too much else in. I've got some other stuff already coming in. And honestly, an HD 130, that's a really heavy chassis. I would really suggest you find someone more local to you. There's a point at which it's not really worth spending a ton when you don't have to. And that's a very heavy chassis. So tell me where you are, and maybe Brad can recommend someone closer to you, because I won't have time to look it up now, but Brad has access to the same list I do. It's a good amp. I would hate to see you ship it across the country and then wait 4 months for me to even get to it. Hey, Opalisk, what's my opinion on power scaling as an alternative or in addition to a typical master volume? Well, my opinion has changed over the years. My opinion used to be that for a cathode biased amp, it was a great, great option. For a fixed bias amp, it's way too complicated, and you're giving too many things that can go wrong, and when they go wrong, you could have a serious, expensive problem. But on cathode bias, it's pretty safe because the bias reference is just ground. But I have since I first began to have questions about its usefulness, because if you scale it partially, so you only scale the output tubes or output tubes in the phase inverter, then as the voltage to the output goes down, the voltage to the preamp goes way up, because the current is not there drawing the entire thing down anymore. And so then you've got to install what's called a voltage clamp, so the preamp cannot exceed X volt specified voltage. And then so you've had a circuit that's twice as complicated, or you scale everything together, which is kind of a compromise in sound, but it works with the fewest parts, which is what I did for a long time. And then I found that the various MOSFETs that are used for this do not last. They do not like the heat, even if you heat sink them by ludicrous amounts, even if you run parallel MOSFETs, so each one only is dealing with half the dissipation, they're just not reliable long term. And I would hate, I have some amps out there that I've done that on, and I know that they're all ticking time bombs because the technology is not as good as we were told implementing that circuit. And I know that it's been a whole cottage industry. I have stopped offering that service. I instead install a very good post-phase inverter master volume when I think it's the right choice for the owner. For some owners, I will say, you have a 100-watt Marshall. It is not designed to be a bedroom amp. Buy a small amp for home use and use the big monster for really big gigs if you're in that rare company these days that can still use 100-watt Marshalls on stage. All right, to the point where people were mentioning that my audio was gating. Hey, Brad, I got this light bulb at Home Depot, one of our big box stores, like 5 years ago. I don't know if they're even made. I need to Google incandescent bulbs and see if I can get a stash, because they're going away, and you can't do that with an LED bulb, et cetera, et cetera. I've got that one, a bigger one, and a smaller one, but that one does 90% of the amps just fine. I don't need to know the precise amount that it's drawing too much. If I have an SVT or something with a huge current draw like that, I've got a Mesa Strategy 88 right now. I put in the bigger bulb, but for everything else, from a twin down to a Princeton, that 150 watt just fine. Well, you've got the more expensive box, Brad, so you don't have to use the light bulb, but the light bulb is handy, and it's just and not only does it tell you that it's drawing too much current, but it keeps you from blowing a fuse in the process. And I don't have to variac it up. I can just turn it on, and hey, if there's a problem, the light bulb just saved the day. Hey, Craig Maloney. I just watched the latest Rift video. He was checking his grounds and voltages. He did not do a voltage check on the chassis. Would you expect to see a small voltage there or less than zero? Well, if he's got his grounds connected to chassis, he's going to measure 0 volts on chassis, and he's going to be using properly grounded power cables. So he's going to have 0 volts AC from chassis to ground. Actual electrical earth. So I'm sure that he's done this enough that he knows if he does X, Y, and Z, he's not going to have any problems with chassis having potential voltage. The issue is if you have an old amp with like this would have been originally with a with a ungrounded power cable, just a 2-conductor, depending on which position this old ground switch was in, you would have either like 2 volts AC potential between the chassis and actual ground, or 120 volts. And it's much better to have 2 volts than 120 volts, but it's best to have a grounded power cable so this chassis has 0 potential volts to ground. That way your guitar strings will have 0 potential volts to ground. Unless you're walk up to the PA and you touch the microphone and the PA is not grounded, in which case the entire PA grounds itself through you. I'd ask for a show of hands of those who've experienced that like I have, but most of us who have, our hands are still shaking. Thanks, Joe Rust. Appreciate that. Abstract, I've got a bone to pick with you. Not just you, a lot of people. It's got a Prince Reverb acclimating after shipping. Last one crackled. Sweetwater sent me another one. Fingers crossed. It's partially a bone to pick with you. It's a bigger bone to pick with Sweetwater. Probably there was nothing wrong with the first Princeton Reverb reissue that came to you, other than the hardware might have needed to be tightened, or it had a tube which didn't like being the shipping experience. And so we have this situation with all these stores that are trying to treat amplifiers the way they would any little thing you order off Amazon, where free shipping, any problem, just return it. Amplifiers cost a lot to ship, and even if you didn't pay for that, the company is paying for that, which means that the price of everything keeps going up. If you order an amp and you've got problems with it, I think they should have sent you troubleshot it over the phone, and maybe you probably had one tube that was microphonic, or an input jack that needed to be tightened. I'm not saying you're at fault. I'm not saying that you've done anything wrong, because part of it's the companies in question, like Sweetwater, should educate their customers nicely, because the customer's always right and all that. But if you get a Princeton Reverb reissue at Crackles, most of the reissues, the jacks aren't all the way tight. And that sucks, but that's the case. And so 10 minutes with the right wrench would tighten them all up. I've seen this all the time, where people will get 3 amps delivered before they get one that doesn't have any issues. The first 2, do those go back as used? Do those go back as B stock? We've got a fly in the ointment, which is driving prices up. Even if we don't pay for shipping, the amps cost more and more as a result of this stuff. Sorry. Hey, Richard, he's considering building a board with a preamp, probably a Freeman IR. Been considering a Fright power station. Anything else to consider for multi-purpose portable preamp-based board setup? Well, there's the Boss thing, but I've heard that the Boss thing is not as good or as reliable as we would like it to be. I think for the purpose of IR plus a power amp for stage hearing yourself on stage, I think the Fryet's probably the best thing on the market. But, call Dave Friedman or email Dave Freeman and ask him what he recommends, because he is doing the IR stuff. He is much more aware of all the products out there. He may say, well, yeah, the Fryhead's great, but I've also had clients who have really good luck with this. Memphis, people aren't doing a lot of the IR stuff because, to do in-ear monitors, you've got to have your own sound guy with your own mixer, all that fun stuff, if it's going to be enjoyable. Otherwise, you're trying to be your own engineer on stage, and some people can do it. Very few people can do it well. And so most people around here are not doing the in-ears. They're just using Princeton's and deluxe reverbs turned down. Hey, Joe Rust, he's got a 79 Vibrolux reverb. He's successfully slowed to a nice level, but recently has stopped functioning. Voltage at the bug, but no light. Did slowing it down kill the roach? I don't think slowing it down would kill the roach, but it depends on how slow it is. The real slow speeds require more voltage swing for the oscillation to keep going. So you can try a different tube. If a different tube is a stronger tube, which has more we're going to have more amplification. You have to have a certain amount of signal for the LFO to self-continue, because you're setting up literally an oscillation that feeds from the plate to the grid, and like this. And if it gets too weak, it can't sustain itself. That's why we have in the Vibrolux and other Fenders like this, we've got a reference to that 2.2 meg resistor to the bias, which helps jumpstart it. Otherwise, when you turn on the tremolo, it could be like 4 seconds before you'd hear the tremolo. That bias reference jumpstarts it. And on a Princeton, grounding it jumpstarts it. It's complicated. But so you could have a tube which is just too weak to continue that. You could have a bad roach, which would be coincidental to you slowing it down. Or you may have just used too large a capacitor. So I don't know what caps you used, but you can always say if you got 47, 33, 22, well, take out the 37 and the 33 and put tack solder 2 22s in there and see if it comes back. That'll tell you. Not a problem, Valve Amp Hobby Shop. I don't mean to be a fascist about the 3 question marks or before questions or asking things just once, but it really makes it hard to find the questions in the chat if they don't have the question marks. And if I see the same question more than once, I'm worried that I've messed up on the scrolling and I went back to where I already was. It just, I'm a one-man show, so I ask for your help and support. Hey, thank you very much, Imok J. I appreciate that. Favorite Lawler Telecaster pickups? I don't remember the model number, T777. I've got some videos up with Steve Selvage with that red telly. And whatever he's gotten, those sound awesome. I really like those. But I don't remember which ones they are. Hey, Music Nerd, he's got a great deal on a brand new 12-inch Princeton Reverb. It's just a larger cabinet. Okay, good. I'm glad it's got the larger cabinet because that makes a huge difference. Other than upgrading the tubes and filter caps, what would be the best bang for the buck upgrades? I've got in my Fender reissue playlist on this channel. So after this stream, look for my playlist. One of them is called Fender Reissues. I've got videos on things that owners can do to their own amps, specifically on the reissue amps. I believe I show that. I think in the video I show it with the deluxe reverb, but the same principles apply. And a lot of it's just tightening the hardware. If you're qualified to do soldering work, and not just basic soldering, not like I've put in some pickups or fixed an input jack on a pedal once, but you've got soldering experience. I do show things you can do to the reissue Fenders to get all the hot stuff off the PCB and move to the octal sockets where they belong. But PCBs are difficult to work on unless you've got a lot of experience. So I would not recommend that to anyone who's a casual hobbyist. But if you live with the amp for a while, the issues that I talk about there with the heat are longer term issues. So you could always say, well, I'm going to live with this amp, and if I really love it and think it's worthwhile, then I'll take it to a tech and have these things done to it, moving the screen grid resistors off the board to the octal sockets, moving the heater connections from the board to the octal sockets, stuff like that. Beyond that, just making sure everything is tight and clean goes a long, long way. And you can find those in my Fender Reissue playlist. Hey, Abstract, should you let amps sit for a day during winter shipping, or does it not matter for amps? It matters mostly for the tubes. You don't want to have the amps and tubes be very, very cold and then come into a warm house with humidity and then get condensation, and then you power them on. So I would let them sit 2-3 hours and check and see if they're dry and more approaching room temperature, then power it on. It's not like a guitar where it takes a long time for the wood to acclimate. You just don't want to have any condensation on the tubes or the metal. But, typically that's going to go away in 2-3 hours, not 24 hours. Dumple are expensive. That is true. How do I get something cheaper for similar? Well, depends on what cheaper is and what is similar. Similar to a Dumble could be an amplified Nation, or it could be a Two-Rock, which costs a lot less, like by a factor of 10, a lot less than a Dumble. So instead of $45,000, you're spending $4,500, which is still not inexpensive. I will tell you a dirty secret. I'll even show you a dirty secret. Wait, turn on this gate. I'm going through a 69 Princeton Reverb right now with a WGS ET10 speaker. And if this were that reissue Princeton that the guy was just talking about, I'm sorry, the guy, I don't remember which one you were, sorry. That was Music Nerds. Sorry. If you had Music Nerds Princeton reissue with the right speaker, you would have the same sound. And so, I can't play up this. Wrong pickup selection. The clean on a Dumble sounds very similar to the clean on that Princeton at this volume level. Get the right overdrive pedal. You could have your little Dumble sound for, $1,500. It's a really good, a good Fender, and starting with like the 65 reissue Princeton or the 65 reissue Deluxe Reverb, and the right pedal in the hands of the right player are going to sound fantastic. There's a clip of Jeff McErlane playing a 5-watt World bus pedal into Princeton, and it sounds like ZZ Top. It just sounds awesome. It sounds like a big old Marshall. A lot of that's the amp. A lot of that's the pedal. Most of that's Jeff McErlane because he's put in the 100,000 hours. So I don't rate the DSC-1 C at all. I don't think that's a very good app. Sorry. DSL C1. I would avoid those DSLs. And even the DSLs that I like the DSL 40 CR, I like them for what their purpose is. If you're in a top 40 band, you need to get 3 or 4 different amp sounds. It works really well. It's not the best clean. It's not the best overdrive. It's not the best lead. But for the price, it does a pretty good job. I really think the two best amps on the market for people who want an amp that they can use at home, they can gig with, and get great sounds all the time. With the top three: Vox AC15 Custom, the C1 or C1X, this Princeton Reverb reissue, the 65, or the 65 Deluxe Reverb reissue. Now, on the Fender reissues, they cost a lot more than the Vox, but you get them used. If you're patient and can shop around, unless you live in like backwater Montana, you probably get either of those Fenders for $1,000, $1,200. You can get the Vox AC15 used for like $400 or $500 most places. They're really good sounding amps. They're not going to try to wow you with effects. They're not going to have built-in overdrive, but they are a core foundation. Unless you're playing metal, in which case you probably need to get something else, in which case the DSL-40C might be pretty good. The DSL-20 and the DSL-1 are kind of junk just so they have something out on the market, and I don't recommend them, sorry. Thank you, Ike. That's very nice of you, especially since I just told you that, no, I don't want to work on your music, man. It's not that I don't want to. It's just I don't want to put you in the situation where you'd have to wait a really long time and pay that big shipping cost for such a behemoth. I think I saw that Brad sent you some links to some people closer to you. Hey, Jolly Bobby Yoger. He's got an Orion Apollo 2. FX loop is busted, have no schematics on any tip on troubleshooting faulty FX loop. I don't know if that's an amplifier. I don't know if that's any kind of preamp. I don't know if it's solid state. I don't know if it's tube. I have no familiarity with or awareness of what that is. So I cannot give you tips on troubleshooting it right now other than see if it's the problem is the send or the return. If the send is working and you got sound on the other side, coming out to something else, the problem's in the return or after. If your return works fine when you plug something else into it, but you have no send, that's as far as I can tell you remotely without knowing the model. Sorry. First of all, just make sure that if it's a tube-based effects loop, that it's not a tube. If it's a solid-state effects loop, I can't tell you in the context of this. Yeah. The things that we do with our irons are not things that we could have done with a 20 or 30 watt pencil iron from the local hardware store. That's God's honest truth. All right, now we're to the duck conversation. I think we're coming up on the first hour. Have I ever worked on RF equipment at all? No, I have not. I've had no need to, thank God. I have no interest in it, and have just avoided it. Someone asked me to restore a stereo once. It was an old 70s receiver, and I sent it to Rob Hull, who you know, Brad, because Rob comes from the Navy background in actual radio. And so, I know my strengths, and that is not one of them. Kugel Pen 64 has sent out NASA workmanship standards, and which is a good thing to be aware of. And NASA is important to be aware of, as is true Milspec. There are aspects of what NASA does that are useful to us. There are aspects of true Milspec which are very useful to us. They don't have to be completely adhered to. Like if you get a Marshall in with turrets, and the capacitor is mounted here, and the leads are going up here, it may look awesome. That's not Milspec. Milspec would be the capacitor body must be down on the board, and then the leads must be going up with no tension to the turrets, and then there's a way that it's supposed to terminate at the turrets, depending on which part of the turret they're using, and may not be a full wrap, only 270 degrees. And that's great if you're sending something into space or into something that's going to have 4 Gs on it. In an amplifier, the traditional thing you see in a Marshall where the cap's kind of suspended in the air with the leads is usually okay. But not doing multiple wraps is still important. So with the NASA stuff, with the Milspec stuff, you have to know what part of it applies to what we're doing, what part is overkill. In my opinion, what amp model has the best clean tone? Well, that's impossible to say because there's so many wonderful ones. And which is better, Jimi Hendrix or Wes Montgomery? I mean, I'll take them all. I'd say that any good Fender is going to have a great clean tone. Most great Marshalls have a great clean tone. Vox AC 30s and 15s have a phenomenal clean sound as well. I would say that a lot of clean sounds that people have really enjoyed, like the Rockman and the Jazz Chorus 120, I don't like at all because those only happen in a very narrow window on the pots, and the JC 120 is noisy, and then above like 3.5 on the volume, it starts to get real compressed and weird sounding. But they're famous for their clean sounds. So, well, Lewis, I don't know what to tell you. That's an odd one. It's possible that you had some funk in the preamp tube socket, and just swapping the tubes back and forth cleared out that funk. Hey, Jim Jules got a 67 Bassman AB165, and he made the changes to the 864 phase inverter. It's got a 120 hertz hum he can't get rid of. Can I explain how to change the preamp nodes to the same filter node? Yeah, well, I don't think it's going to be 120 hertz, but it's possible. On your Bassman, on V3, in stock form, V3A is going, I believe, through a 100K resistor to the yellow connection to the other preamp nodes, and V3B is going through a separate 100K resistor through a blue wire to the other preamp node. And the way to fix that is to have V3B have its plate tied to the same node as the plate for V3A. So instead of having two resistors like this, you would leave the blue wire there, but move that plate resistor to connect to there, and that puts that V3A and B on the same node. And that means that when you're mixing V3B with V1B, you are mixing, because it's a DC mixer, you're mixing DC from the same node. And so you're not decoupling them. The way the stock one works is you have V3A is on the first node, and V1B is on the first preamp node with the 10 microfarad or 8 microfarad, and V3B is on the second node, which doesn't have that additional filtering. But then, since they're being mixed with 470Ks with an active DC mixer, you're undoing the decoupling for the first stage. Beyond that, be very sure that you reversed the green and black wires at the output jack if you've changed over to the 864 phase inverter, and make sure that you've got a very clean connection to the chassis at your output jacks, and a very clean connection to the chassis for the bias pot. And if necessary, though that would typically be 60 hertz, add an additional bias cap from the wiper or the bias pot to ground, as I've shown. Actually, wait, that Bassman is not going to. Sorry, your 165. The output's going to have the split bias. Bias balance circuit. Ignore what I just said about adding an additional cap, but that's the way to do the preamp nodes. And you could also have, in any AB165 Bassman, the wires which go beneath the board, the cloth-covered wires, those things get filthy and they're running across other things. And as the insulation breaks down, you can get noise introduced into those leads that are going beneath the board. Sometimes I've had to remove them and replace them with leads going above the board, because you have this wire which has one signal and this wire has another signal, and they're going across each other underneath the board. But the insulation for both of them has soaked up beer over the decades, and so there's no insulation. Maybe I'm doing Ultraman. I miss Ultraman. What is my take on amp speaker break-in? I typically just play the damn things, and I know that if they should sound good from day one, and they will sound even better about 6 weeks from them. But if I need to break one in, I have done the manual thing, which skeeves me out a bit. I have done the Variac thing, which I don't recommend to most of you. What I have done with most reliable results is I plug my iPod, not my iPod, now my phone or something into it, that iPad behind me, and I'll pump something with a lot of low information, like Paul's Boutique, into the amp, and I cover the cab in blankets so I don't have to hear it. And I will do that, and then I'll go to the grocery store and run some errands for a few hours and come back. And meanwhile, that speaker has been excursioning. Excursioning? Is that a word? It's a word now. Excursioning. Speaking of excursions, let's take our first intermission. See you guys back in 7 minutes. I botched it. That's a really nice sounding amp. That's the 69. That's the one that used to be able to get for a couple $100 at every pawn shop. They're not a couple $100 anymore, but they're worth every penny. Wrong button. Go away. Go away. All right, there he goes. All right. Jeff Harper. No, I get what it means. I learned that from Faith on Buffy. That's my military reference for you. Let's see. The deluxe reverb you built pops a couple seconds after turning it off, Cody Leroy writes. What causes this? Seems there's a simple capacitor fix I can try. It shouldn't be doing that. You've got some ground that's not right. You've got something not right in your amp. I'm sorry to say that, but deluxe reverb, after you turn it off, should not pop at all. It should just go off. You can have popping in a standby switch, which is often arcing at the switch itself, but it's also possible you've got a bad rectifier tube. But in general, you should not be having that. So I don't think you need to add capacitors to fix that. You need to find what the actual cause is. Adding a capacitor to that kind of thing would be a Band-Aid as opposed to a cure. Hey, Count Domingo the 7th. Today, the mighty Seiko SNA 411, the Flight Master on a Craig Bond NATO. I love this combination. I had it on the Marine Nationale for a long time and always had to tighten it during the day. And I've got a really nice bracelet that fits it, not the stock one. The stock one was garbage, but it gets heavy on the bracelet. And I've got I tried a sailcloth strap, and it always hurts here and here. It just never loosened up, never got any curve to it. But this thing is so comfortable and looks the tits. I just love this combination. Oh, Matt Johnson, thoughts on currently available EF86 tubes? No updates, no new thoughts. It's kind of a crapshoot. And you know, if you buy a new old stock one, may be fantastic for a week and then develop noise issues. EF86s are tough ones to find good ones. And you know, I think the Electro Harmonics and the JJ, and I think maybe a Mullard in that video of the current production, and they're just kind of all over the map in terms of the actual gain factor. So you know, see what you can find so that works for you. It's tricky. Hey, Emak, I know some guys in the Philly area, but I don't know about Pittsburgh. Maybe Jeff, or maybe Brad's got you covered. All right, good, cool. Hey, NA, not available. Any recommended mods for Princeton Reverb Cathodion phase inverter to reduce blocking distortion? Yeah, you're very welcome. Check out valvewizard.co.uk. Merlin Blanco's excellent site. He's got some good information on that, and everything he shows does work. Then the other trick you can do is if you move the phase inverter to the previously unused node in a Princeton between the 18Ks. And there's an 18K with a 22 or 16 to the ground, an 18K, and that node is not used. If you move the reverb to that node and you move the phase inverter to that node and you play around with the 18K, I would suggest maybe a 10K and a 15K. You're going to get or 10K and 18K. Now keep your preamp voltage about the same, but you'll have you'll have more available B plus to the output section, in which case you probably want to change your plate and cathode resistors on the cathodion from 56K to 68K. In my experience, that keeps everything optimal. But you can keep the stock 56K if you want to. That's some deep magic stuff here. You have to be here at the second hour of the chat to get that kind of stuff. Yeah, Matt Johnson. New design should avoid can caps and axial caps as much as possible. And some companies will and some companies won't. But, if you buy an amp which has can caps and 20 years from now it needs to be recapped, you're going to have to find someone who can super glue in some radials or something, or put in some terminal strips to accept radials, because there won't be any current production can caps. We're the only industry that uses them. I guess us and people who make capacitors for air conditioning systems, and I'm sure that those are going to change over as well. Where do I prefer to ground the screen supply filter node in AB763 Fenders tied to reservoir caps, the preamp, or its own? I find that the way Fender did it on the AB763 is perfect. So on the AB763, the screen and two preamp nodes are all grounded together to chassis near the input jacks for the normal channel. And the reservoir cap is grounded over by the output transformer, the power transformer next to where the HD center tap is grounded. And in fact, those can be the same ground point if the ground wire is long enough. The important thing on those is that they have the reservoir cap separate from all the other ground nodes. And then everything else is grounded locally to the cathode in the stage. And that cathode then connects the chassis in sequence. Now, in theory, if you want to, you can separate the grounds of the filter caps and have the screen connect to chassis at the same point where the phase inverter wire from the board goes to the chassis. You can have subs next preamp node cap go where. Let me show you. I've got this one here. So you would want to find this black wire here. I'm sorry, I'm doing everything backwards. This is the preamp node for all the grounds. So you keep the first 22 here, the second one maybe here, the screen one over here where this one goes, and keep the reservoir caps where the reservoir caps are. But it won't make any real difference. The noise floor is already really low when all that is done properly. So, but if you're building a new one and you don't want to do the original build, you can do it the way I just described. Yeah, I mean, heat sinks help with the MOSFETs, EMAC-J, but the MOSFETs will die in time, even with proper heat sinking, even with over-the-top heat sinking. I just don't think the MOSFETs really do the job long term. Maybe we should design them to be socketed so they're easy to replace, but then you have a socketed MOSFET. The socketing itself introduces heat issues. There is no free lunch in this case. Thank you, David Treaser. The brass ground was really just a way that Fender could speed up production on the line, because they could have all the pots together in a brass control thing, and then pop it into a chassis, solder the wires from the old cap leads on the boards to that thing, and so one person could be doing the front panels, one person could be doing the boards, and they come together really fast. Electronically, it has no real benefit. Other than it's easier to solder to brass than it is to steel. So it was much faster for them. But you don't need to use the brass ground in a new build. I would not, in fact, because getting a brass panel custom made with all the holes where you want it to be would probably be pretty expensive. So most new builds are going to be using aluminum chassis rather than steel anyway, so I would suggest just putting in some number 6 screws, machine screws with proper nuts, either nylock or Caps nuts, holding in place ground lugs and making those grounds to chassis that way. And whether you separate them out like I described, or whether you have, this is everything but the reservoir cap down here at the input end, both ways work. You can have the reservoir cap connected to everything else, but the sequence can be very tricky, and you can introduce issues. And it's always easiest to get good, quiet results if you separate the reservoir and the HT center tap ground from everything else. Those are the noisiest grounds in the amp. Hey, Jez Bass, I don't know anything about Albion guitar amps, sorry. Hey, Gringo Pig. Hey, the Steve M 12065. Just got a 57 Custom Deluxe from Fender. How's the quality in these reissues? They're okay. They're not as good as they're promised to be. I don't think they're as well built as, say, a Victoria or similar, but they're okay. What should you do to upgrade wise to ensure years of playing through it? In stock form, really, unless you've got a noise issue, or in which case the lead dress can usually be improved, there's not anything you need to do to upgrade it for longevity. It's not going to have a short lifespan. There's nothing wrong with that amp except the price point. It is they charged way too much for what they gave, and they made all kinds of promises about how we're doing it right, and others have done Fenders better than Fender has done for a long time. Joe Rust found a loose connector at the foot switch on his Vibrolux. That'll do it. Brad's living with broken Gibson headstocks and separated maton bridges. So yeah, it must be a day that ends in a Y. Let's see. Getting to the next questions. Hey, 6-string codger. I have not had the AC30S in. I assume that it is built similarly to the AC10 Custom, in which case they're using a combination of MOSFETs and valves, which can be problematic. It's certainly problematic in the way they do on the AC4 and the AC10 Custom series. I have not had the AC30S, though. It may be a very good compromise, and I hope that it is, but I have not had one, so I cannot give you an opinion, pro or con. I can say that the AC30 Custom and the AC15 Custom, the C1, are excellent amps. And I hope that the S1 is, but I have my suspicions that it may not be quite as good. Hey, DK, just got his 07 Deluxe Reverb reissue, first real tube amp. When I turn on the unit, it will crackle, idle, and get worse with loud playing. After 15 minutes, it tends to disappear. Anything I can or should do? Caps are stock, but not leaking, and everything is tight. Someone's been in it, but nothing changed as far as he knows. It could be bad caps, even if they're not visually leaking. But if it gets okay after about 15 minutes, you either have a bad tube, and one of the ways to find that is to see if you have the problems with the normal channel as well as the reverb channel. You've got 6 preamp tubes in your amp, and if you were to pull the middle 4 and just leave V1 and V6, so if you're looking from the rear of the amp, the one on your right, then 1, 2, 3, 4 blank ones, then another small tube, and then the power tubes. Then use the normal channel. If you don't have a problem with that issue, then it's in one of the preamp tubes for the other channel. Or you could have a bad solder joint, or you could have a dirty connection in one of the ribbon connectors. That amp's got like 3 or 4 ribbon cable connectors where the multi-pins can benefit from being opened and squirted with some isopropyl alcohol, letting them air dry, then putting them back together. That tends to do it. But it sounds like something is not making good connection for the first 15 minutes or so. Then the connection gets good, which is typically something expanding with heat. So a tube, a solder joint, less commonly multi-section ribbon connection, but it could also be that you have a bad cap that is internally having that problem. Those IC branded filter caps are terrible. Sorry. Thanks, Jeremy Montgomery. Appreciate that. Thoughts on reverb on both channels of AB 763 and the various methods to do so? Well, the way that Fender does it in, say, the 68 Custom series is they just bridge the plates of V1 and V2, which does two things. Number one, it gives you a DC mixer, which is the noisiest possible way of mixing the tubes. Number two, if you pull one of the tubes, so instead of each V1 and V2 being present, if either one of those is removed from the amp or either one of those triodes stops to operate because the tube dies, then instead of having a 100K plate resistor, the tube which is still operating has 50K plate resistor, and you get a huge drop in gain and volume. So between the reliability on stage and the noise level, it's the worst possible way to do it. They do it because they can omit one capacitor, one resistor, and just put in a wire bridging them. The correct way that they should have done it is to have each plate of V1B and V2B have an individual plate resistor, 100K, and an individual capacitor taken from that stage, coupling cap, and then the output of those two capacitors to be mixed together with two 220K resistors. So you have AC mixing. So all the problems go away of one tube going out. The plate load is always the same. The behavior is the same. And you have the quietest possible way to combine the two channels. Then you have reverb and tremolo on both amps. Now, there is one other issue. You can have more gain by doing it either of these ways than if you have the 220K mix resistors where they are traditionally in the amp. But those two resistors are still there. So what you would do is you would make a voltage divider where the old 220K mix resistors at the input of the phase inverter would be with, say, like a 100K resistor in series, just to give that benefit before the input cap, and then maybe a 470K to 1 meg to ground from that point. So you get a slight gain reduction, so the amp has the proper amount of headroom for a deluxe reverb or super reverb or what have you. But that is optional. It's okay if it's louder and dirtier if you like that. But the best way, if you want to keep it sounding like it would be in 1965, but to have reverb and tremolo on both channels, is to do the AC mixer right off the plates after the coupling caps of V2B and V1B, and then recreate the voltage divider that you would have normally had from the mixers. The mix stage going into the phase inverter. I hope that's clear. I know it's difficult to talk about without pictures and diagrams and stuff. What would I use for the most appropriate coupling caps in a 66 Pro Reverb? The Ajax are missing before I began working on it, and the current 715Ps don't sound right to me. Thanks. Well, there are a lot of capacitors you can use. The 715P is a polypropylene cap, and the original Ajaxes were polyester caps. The three caps that I would recommend to you to try are all polyester. One would be the 220p or 418 series, still orange drops. They're 600 volt caps. You can get them at tubesandmore.com. And they are orange drops, but they are polyester rather than polypropylene. They do have a slightly different sound, and those would be one appropriate choice. The next choice you can get from Mauser, which is less expensive per cap, but harder to navigate, the Panasonic ECQ series. A physically smaller cap, but also polyester. They sound very good. Now, the Panasonic and the orange drop, the polyester version of the orange drop, are both radial caps. So you have the cap body and the leads go straight down, and you have to bend them out to the side, and they can stress at the epoxy coating. So the cap that I would actually use in your amp, if it were on my bench and we had to replace that capacitor, typically would be a Vishay MKT 1813, which is also available at tubesandmore.com. It is yellow rather than blue. But it is a film and foil polyester cap, which sounds great. It is axial, which means that when his body is laid flat against the fiberboard, the leads go straight out to the side, so there's no stress where the leads join the body. They sound great, they're inexpensive, and they do what they say on the tin. You would be very hard-pressed in a blind test to tell the difference between those and Blue Ajax caps original to the amp. Or same with the Panasonic, same with the orange drops, the polyester orange drops. I do find that polypropylene caps sound a little bit different than polyester caps in Fenders. It's a little different, but I find that is discernible. But it's really difficult to hear any difference between different polyester caps. So then you're looking at form factor. The board was laid out for axial caps like the Blue Ajax. I like to use axial caps in there. But there's if you want something that's blue and axial, and you want to spend the money, then you can get either the blue Synergy or the blue Sozos. They're going to cost about $7 to $10 each, and they'll be blue, and they will sound just like the less expensive caps I recommended. But you'll have the pride of ownership of having blue caps that you'll never see, that you spent 3 times as much for because reasons. Hey, TWC. Sorry, Bassbreaker 15s are notoriously bad quality. Most techs don't want to work on them. Fender does this on so many models. Any quality options with a similar sounding circuit, depends on your budget. Tell me what sounds you're trying to get at what your price range is. They're just not... They're not worth fixing. Fender designed them for landfill. I'm sorry. They're just really poorly built, extraordinarily poorly built. Same for the Marshall Origin 20. Just absolute garbage, and it's a crime. Is 15-watt output transformer okay for Princeton Reverb with 2 modern 6v6s? I pushed my Princeton Reverb a bit hard for a while, 2 hours, I guess, and output transformer was gone. Well, the original is 12 watts, so 15 watt is fine, but it seems that I would contact Habor or Mercury and get the exact replacement if possible, because the footprint can be different. But there's just no reason for an output transformer to die when playing 2 hours in a Princeton. I've played these Princetons, which are 60 plus years old, or approaching 60 years old, for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. And it just doesn't occur to me that a healthy amp, I could crank these from playing for 6-hour sets, and these transformers would hold up fine. So something else is probably going on with your amp. Hey, John Ram, he's got a black face Vibrolux with all the 250 picofarad caps and the 500 picofarad and the 10 picofarad, swapped from ceramic to silver mica. Good quality. The ones which actually will say CDM on them, not just SM. Would I swap them back to ceramics and the bright caps too? Well, if your amp came to my bench and it had all these silver micas and they were not generic, so not likely to fail, and you said you liked the sound of the amp, I would not change them. If your amp came in with generic silver micas or came in with the old caps that were failing and need of replacement, which is not as common as people think, then I would replace them with Vishay Class 2 ceramics, the 562R series, because that is more correct to the original sound of the amp. That does not mean that you're wrong to like the silver micas. The silver micas are going to be marginally smoother sounding than the ceramics. A good designer and builder can get a great sound with either type of capacitor, silver mica or ceramic. I have found that a good quality ceramic is available in more values and costs less than a good quality silver mica. So I stock very good quality ceramics. I'm not using the 15-cent cheap generic ones. I'm using the dollar ones, but I'm not using the $3 silver micas. So it makes sense for me and my clients to have a good sounding, inexpensive, reliable cap. And so that points towards the Vishay ceramics over the CDM silver micas. But if you already have them and you like the sound, you are absolutely correct. So AtVu's got the Neural DSP plugins Tone King. This is the best, right? If it works for you, man, it's awesome. The issue with the Neural plugin stuff is it depends on who did the capture, and so you could have 20 guys out there putting Tone King captures up on the internet for you to download, and 2 of them might be awesome, and others might sound like crap. But the thing is, if your first experience is one of the ones that if you first try one and you think it sounds great, it may not be that great. It may just be okay, or maybe kind of crappy. So try a bunch of different captures from different people and see what you think. But hey, if you smile when you play it and it allows you to make music, that's the goal. But there is no best anything. There's just what's right for you. If it doesn't catch on fire or rip you off, that's where I'm here for on the channel, is mostly to make sure that you get the thing that's right for you, that won't self-immolate or become obsolete or saddle you with incredible repair bills 2 years from now. It is not just you. It is a very terrible amp. Hey, John Ram. It is a Weller 70-watt soldering station capable of making good chassis grounds on old Fenders. Need more juice? I imagine that the soldering station would be pushed to its limits. I put all this kind of stuff in the description of my videos, but what I use is this Weller. You see that? SPG 80L. That is the 80-watt iron. And that is the tip I use. I use that for all my chassis grounds, and it does a great job. And I can use the entire flat surface to heat up an area of the chassis, or I can use just the tip if I need to do a smaller amount. And I can rotate it to have more or less contact with the chassis to flow more or less solder. So I'll often use a flat spot to tin the chassis, and I'll let the flat spot sit against the chassis for a while, so that chassis that I've already scraped up a little area with cross-hatching and cleaned it first gets really hot, and then I have a tinned area on the chassis that sets the kind of the outer perimeter, the area that I want to have solder on, and then I'll use the tip up on edge to flow solder to, so I have a lot of control. So I get a nice dome that doesn't spread out into a flat puddle. So that's how I use this. I like this one a lot. There are other ways. There are many like this. This one's mine. And it gets beastly hot. Let's see. Thank you, Krister Westland. That's very kind of you. Appreciate that very much. Let's see. What is my opinion of VHT amps? Rudy Gonzalez asked. Well, old VHT, back when Steve Fryette ran the company, is fantastic. Modern VHT, since Steve sold the company, is kind of crappy. So I don't know which one you're talking about. But the old stuff that Steve Fryette made was fantastic. The current stuff is not built to the same level. Let's see. You don't have to worry about the voltage rating on a fuse. A 250 volt fuse is twice as safe to use. 125 volts. It's the current rating that we look at. 2 amp is 2 amp. Let's see. Is there a sympathetic relationship between the speaker and chassis and Fender combos? I.e., if you had an identical cab connected externally, would it have an impact by not resonating the chassis? John Ram asks. I believe it does, but it's really hard to quantify what that is or predict what that is. But yeah, I think that I know from direct experience that I can have an amp that sounds fantastic on the bench, and then I put it in the cabinet, and all of a sudden it reveals problems, even though the amp on the bench has been plugged into its own cabinet, which is 5 feet to the left. Yeah, there are vibrations, and you get to the point where it's not going to cause any problems. But I think that it does always affect the sound. It's not just that, though. It's really hard to know what's what, because not only is the chassis physically attached to the cabinet, which is going to have vibrations, but also by putting that chassis in the cabinet, you're blocking sound from coming out of the hole at the top, if it's a Fender combo, and you're changing the volume of the cab. So the cabinet will sound different with or without the chassis in place, and the chassis will produce sound differently whether or not it's coupled acoustically to the speaker. So it's really hard to quantify, but yeah, there is a sympathetic relationship. Paul's Boutique and excursioning within a 10-second period. This is why I'm here. Thanks, Richard. Appreciate that. Boom. Let's see. Abstract says, kind of annoyed the replacement speaker wobbles just like the first one. I even requested Sweetheart check it out. That doesn't wobble. They said it didn't. Yeah, it does. It wobbles. It's got 4 little metal feet. If it's wobbling, you've got an issue with your floor. You can change those feet out to big, fat rubber feet, but the stock Fenders have little metal glider feet, and they will wobble if the floor is not level. Put it on carpet. Hey, T777, I use 2.4 millimeter most of the time. Is the Laney Analog Solid State Series reliable? Just ordered an LH61x12 combo. Audacious Ace, I cannot say. I've not had any of their solid state amps. I tend not to work on solid state amps. So I hope it is, but I have no experience with it. The only Laneys I've had in have been tube, depending on the era and the model, of varying qualities. But some of the newer ones have been kind of nice. Tariffs on tubes come Monday. No one knows what the hell is going on. And I don't like to comment on politics on this channel. And I'm sure the president is very wise in ways which are just unfathomable to the rest of us. And I'm sure all will be well. And we're just in for just such a good time coming up. Everything's going to be so wonderful. You know, who needed all those rights and freedoms and economic opportunities? And I think it's a great time to go back to the 19th century, don't you? I love that duck. Jeff Dorman, maybe Brad can find you a Detroit area tech. Let's see. Hey, Kimball Ormsby, it doesn't matter if it's an early one or a reissue or anything. Avoid the Pro Juniors unless you just have money to burn. they're not very good. They don't last. They sound okay if you change out the speaker, but then they're going to fail. They're just, for that same price, you can get a used AC15 custom and keep the master volume down, which is an infinitely better amp. The Pro Junior and all the Blues series and Hot Rod series just rip off things that Fender did. They were getting pants by PV with the Classic 15, Classic 20, and so they wanted to compete, and so they wanted to get to the same price point, and they had to design an amp that they come out to market with in like 6 months for $300. It cost them $300. So they reused stuff that they'd had in 10-year-old amps. They caught on fire on those amps, but it wasn't a design, it was a cobble. It was a throw together to get something to the market, and they've stayed on the market and been the best-selling amp of all time, which is a sad, sad statement. But they're just really poorly built, and they will rip you off, and they will fail on you. And the Pro Junior is the worst of the lot with its plastic, fantastic construction. It's garbage. Hey, Warden Jeans, any other higher headroom recommendations other than a twin? Depends on your budget. High watt DR103 is a fantastic thing, but it costs quite a bit more. How high volume do you need it to be? High volume is not the same as high headroom. I have a lot of headroom at low volumes for the 69 Princeton I've been playing today. So I don't know what stages you need to be loud at. Thanks, Jeff Dorman. That's very kind of you. Appreciate that. Let's see. Get into the next questions. All right. I've had the VHT question again. Already asked that. Hey, Steve Henry, I have no experience with the StewMac amp kits. Thank you for the kind words. I believe they may, in fact, be the exact same thing as the Mojo Tone amp kits, in which case they're going to be good, but I have not looked at the StewMac kits. I don't build kits, and I don't really keep up with that world other than sometimes someone will bring in a kit build that they got in over their head with. So I'm the wrong person to ask. But I think StewMac did that kind of in partnership with Mojo Tone as a way of making each other's customer base aware of each other. I could be wrong. Sergeant Grinch, I am glad that you're still here. Mergen says, is it possible to make a 1960 Ampeg Jet more Fenderish? Yes, you sell it to someone who wants a 1960s Ampeg Jet and you buy a Fender. Don't change a 1960 Ampeg Jet. That is its own thing. It'd be like changing a Marshall to be more like a Fender or a Fender to be more like a Vox. It's just the wrong way to go. I am not familiar with Fat Jimmy amps from California. I'm familiar with Fat Jimmy speakers, and the guy who has those made. The Fat Jimmy speakers are custom spec speakers made by Warehouse. If it's the same guy running Fat Jimmy amps, then I imagine they're pretty good, but I have no experience with them or knowledge of them. Let's see. Is the Vox New Tube Super Beetle good? This is the first I've heard of the Vox New Tube Super Beetle. I'll have to look that up this afternoon. I'm unfamiliar with that. Sorry. Hey, recently got Chris R. got a used Top Hat King Royale. It's developed some very audible ghost notes. Should be the first step by a tech or a new set of tubes. Ghosting is generally a sign that there is too much ripple on the output stage, which is usually not going to be tubes, but if it's a cathode biased amp, it could be output tubes, which are just not well matched, so you're not canceling out the common mode noise, and which would include AC ripple. So the least expensive thing, if you have a spare set of tubes, would be to try a spare set of tubes. I don't remember if the King Royale is 84s or 34s or what. If it's the tubes, that's fantastic. That was your Hail Mary, and you had it easy. But it's often a sign of a failing filter cap. So if you have the tubes, try them. But know that any good tech would probably suss that out in about 10 minutes. Hey, Albius TV, why AC30 Custom Classic Series amps selling so low in secondhand market? Because the Custom Series came out, which is a better amp in the same price range, new and used. And so if you buy, when the used better amp is competing with the used lesser amp, the lesser amp is going to cost less, which is good if you like the Custom Classic, which a lot of people do. And they're certainly good amps, they're just not as good as the replacement model. So is my mic distorted, overdriven? I asked about that. Let's see. Oh yeah, getting some red. All this time and no one told me. So, people had complained before that I was too quiet. I don't feel too quiet. Let's see. Doop-a-doop-a-doop-a-doo. Let's see how this does. Is that better for people? I don't want to have distortion on my voice. I appreciate Colby Jack. Is that any better? Hello, hello, testing, testing, testing. This is the frustrating part where I have to wait for someone to say, no, it's still terrible, or not telling me before that it was. Okay. I did bring the compressor makeup gain down by 3. I had people saying that they couldn't hear previous chats, and I've done the previous couple months chats without any compression, just a limiter. So I added about a 2.5 to 1 compression today, and because I've got this program going to another program, going into this program, going to you guys, and the metering on the program I use for streaming is very rough. It's hard to know until I hear it back. And I did a quick test. It sounded okay to me there, but maybe I got excited and got loud. Let's see. Thank you from the Steven 12065. Appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you very much, Jacob K. Guitar. He followed my Marshall Ground Schemes video on the 7587. Mostly noticed a reduction in blocking distortion. Well, that'll happen because you're going to have less intermodulation because everything's going to have a reduction in eddy currents. Any plans for a follow-up video? I've been meaning to do one on Fenders for a long time, and maybe I'll do one since I have quite a few Fenders in. The Marshall was showing how the Marshall was kind of close, but how to take it there. And the Fender video is going to be, and this is how it was done very, very well. But later with higher gain amps, this will fall apart, and here's why. And I just haven't had the time, but I mean to. We have to remember that I'm not trying to be a YouTube channel about amps. I'm trying to be an amp guy who also does YouTube videos, and so sometimes the amps have to take priority. Even if I'd love to do a video on this or that, finding the time is tricky. I did work on a power station, Kevin Leary, about 3 or 4 months ago. One of the 4 or 5 watt resistors on the inductor board let the smoke out. Unfortunately, the value written on it is burnt. I've got a video of, I think it's the 100 watt, a couple months ago, and maybe in that video you can see the value. Let's see, did I have it? I'm trying to. Okay, I reached out. I reached out to Frayette to see if they'd shared the schematic with me, and I never heard back. So I just had to figure it out on my own. So I don't have the schematic for you, but maybe you can find that resistor value shown in the video I did on it. Hopefully, it's the same model. Good luck. Thanks, Jacob K. Guitar. The Bluesbreaker issue and the 802204. Yeah. I changed the grounds on almost all Marshalls that come in because they're so close to being perfect, and they just get those things wrong, and you fix those little things, and it's like, oh, this is what it sounds like without the. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but just a little bit. A guy in Austria put out a single-ended Class A amp using a KT150 promising 25 watts. Any thoughts on this? Thanks. Well, if he has big enough transformers, sure, you can. But then it's just a single-ended Class A amp, which is of more interest to audiophiles and to musicians, in my experience. What is that? I think people like that to do that kind of thing, and maybe for someone's record player, but it's silly. Class A is there's a reason I associate it with champs. You know, it's a very easy thing to do. How common is it for a combo amp to not be level and rock back and forth? Nice answer, Rob F. You know, if I've got several Fender combos here on the little metal gliders on old hardwood floors, and none of them wobble. But I know that I could take them to other places and have wobble. It's going to depend on your floor. So, but if that's a problem for you, go get some rubber feet. You can get 4 thick rubber feet from a company for like $5, and they just screw in to the bottom, and you can get them like 2 inches thick, and then you won't have any wobble at all. But I don't think it's a problem with the amp you got from Sweetwater. I think it didn't wobble for Sweetwater because they have a level surface. Well, David Treaster, if you're making the brass plate, it's almost purely an aesthetic thing. Electronically, it's unimportant, but if it makes you happy, go for it. Abstract, it's not the amp, it's your floor. I'm sorry. And if it does it on hardwood, put it on some carpet. What's the lowest acceptable noise floor for a Bassman 59 reissue? I replaced the filter caps off a new one with F&Ts and followed all my tips. Don't have a reference. Thanks. It's going to depend on the tubes used. And are you talking about the volumes off? With the volumes off, you should barely be able to hear that it's on until you turn the volumes up. I don't have a reissue right now. I've got an actual 58 here, but I can't really show you the noise floor here because it's what we hear versus the dynamic range that can come across the internet is very different. But it should be a very quiet amp when everything's working right. I hope you notice in my video on the Bassman reissue that there is an additional filter node, which I removed. Not really an additional node, but the two things in parallel. They had like 47 microfarad at the preamp, with ridiculously stiff. But it's hard to tell you what the acceptable noise floor should be, because do I give it to you in engineer speak, and would everyone understand that? And you have to have a reference for that. So. Thank you, David Treaster. Static electricity. Do we accidentally destroy circuit boards? Asked Teddy Ray Thomas. Very rarely. Now, if you have op amps on there, sometimes you can damage an op amp with static, but that's typically not going to be because you have the amp and touch the amp. It's if I were to take a new op amp and I just picked it up out of the package and picked it up with my fingers and touched it to the board, I could potentially damage it. It's not as common with op amps as people think. Certainly true with logic chips, and it's true with the CPUs and stuff. But unless you've got a whole bunch of op amps or logic chips in your amp or DSP chips, everything else in the amp is very robust as far as static electricity. And how often are you going to be touching your board? Because you shouldn't, because right next to the DSP that you should not touch with your fingers under any circumstances is something that's going to be 400 volts you should not touch with your fingers for very different reasons. Let's see. Is it possible for a tremolo oscillator, like in a Marshall 18 watt, to cause red plating in half an output section via low frequency oscillation? Hey, Lucas, that's a good question. Yeah, it is possible. Just odd that it would happen in half the output because, well, a tremolo oscillator in an 18 watt, that depending on the circuit, if an Marshall 18 watt is going to be doing affecting the behavior of the cathode of a preamp tube, whereas in like a old Princeton or something, it's the output bias which is being wobbled. I imagine that it's possible, but unlikely, Lucas. Does the red plating go? Say that V2 is the tube with the tremolo LFO attached in your Marshall. If you pull V2, does the red plating stop? In which case you might have a problem with your decoupling, where one stage is not decoupled from other stages. I'd have to have your amp on the bench to track that down and give you things specific. That's an interesting problem to have, but it's a suck-ass problem to have. Sorry. All right, I think it's time for the second where people talk about the duck spot. Time to do another 7-minute intermission, and we will come back and hopefully not need to have the duck for anything else. See you in 7 minutes. All righty, we are back. See if I can get this. Sorry, roller chair versus guitar cables. John Ram, let me know what you find with those tests. What would be a good substitute for a broken volume pot in a 64 AC 30? Well, motor amps, this is going to sound very strange to you, but in the AC 30s that I've had in, the most reliable, good, every time choice is a 10% audio taper alpha pot, the 24 millimeter alpha pot with the 3/8 inch bushing. It is not an expensive pot. I have done the PEC sealed stainless steel with carbon, with plastic wipers and all that, and they get noise issues down the road. I've done the CTS, but the CTS 1 meg audio cuts out below 9 o'clock. 30% taper is wrong for the AC30. It gets too loud too fast. So the alpha 10%, and you can also try Burns. I've not tried the Burns. Probably Burns or the alpha would be your best choice. Just know, well, it doesn't really matter in this case because in the AC30 the ground is made to the bus wire, bus bar going across the top. But on the alpha, at least, you cannot solder easily to the shell of the pot itself. But I like the alphas. Thoughts on quality of Jet City amps? Well, the parts of Jet Cities are quite good. Most of the problems that I've had on Jet Cities have been, ironically, with the lamp. The lamp twists and comes loose and shorts out and kills the power transformer. If that hasn't happened, the lamps are crappy. The circuit's actually pretty good and easily upgradable to full SLO if you wish. So I think Jet Cities are kind of sleepers, but they have crappy switches and crappy lamps. DB's got to check on his cassoulet. I'm jealous. I wish I had a cassoulet. It's kind of about to be like 4 degrees here Monday, so I may need to join you in cassoulet making. Soldering question, JDS asks, what's my take on mechanical wire connections versus straight through wire before soldering? A lot of techs are going straight in, saying mechanical is pointless. Well, a lot of techs can say anything they want. Mechanical connection is always best. Now, it doesn't mean that you need to wrap it multiple times. A J-hook, if I'm going into, say, a preamp tube socket, I'll go in, I'll come up, and I'll bend it back. So it's kind of going like that. And after I solder it, I'll snip it. I don't need to do the full crimp to it. But just to have that mechanical thing taking the force as opposed to just wiggling in the joint. Other places I like to do, in an eyelet board, I go down and then under the board whenever possible. When there's a turret involved, I like to have it a mechanical wrap, 270 degrees, not 360. Mechanical connections are always best, and you can, especially on the filter caps I do on old Fenders, you can see that I take the lead and bring it down under the board and then bring it across, and then I snip it off so there's about that much underneath the board held between the eyelet, between the top board and the insulating board. Mechanical support's always good. I have no opinion on the Fryette Ether and the separate power amp Colin Buxton because I have no knowledge of or experience with said things. I hope it's great. If it's something that Steve's making, I'm sure it's quite good. Audacious Ace, I believe the Runt 20 has got a pretty good master volume. I wouldn't mod it or do a variac or anything like that. If it's too loud for even with the master volume, get a load box, and I'm sure that Dave Freeman would be glad to point you to the right one that he'd recommend for that. But I think the Runt 20 with the master volume is quite a nice sounding amp. Let's see. I've been told by an amp builder that Dumbles were special because he selectively assembled wide tolerance parts to exact tolerances, meaning he'd reject. Well, I know that he would measure everything, and he wanted a certain value range. And I know that he would play around with positionings of the outer foil on caps and stuff. I think way too much is made of the mystical aspects of Dumbles. They're just circuits. They're good sounding circuits. They're not better sounding than Fenders. They're not worse sounding than Fenders. They're just slightly different. And the overdrive is pretty cool. And they and the train wreck are both variations on what you do if you repurpose that extra gain stage in an old Bassman. And I have absolutely nothing but respect for Dumble's accomplishments, but it's science. It is literally not rocket science. It's fairly basic electronics theory, and way too much is made of the magical powers of Dumble versus the players that were playing Dumble in that period. If Larry Carlton and Robin Ford and these guys are the sound of Dumble, they could have been using acoustic, and we'd think, oh my God, the acoustic 360 was the best amp ever, because the ideas and the playing and the note choice, and so there's a big overlap for the entire classic period there. What are my thoughts and experience with power tube sockets soldered directly to circuit boards? It's usually done badly. It can be done rather well. It's going to depend on the power tube involved and how the board is designed. It's not a hard and fast rule. It's usually a cost-cutting measure. And I know some guys that do it well that prefer not to have to do it, but to make a price point they do. But they design that board separately from everything else, and they design that board specifically for heat and higher current. It's much easier to do with EL84s than to do with EL34s, for instance. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's something that when you see it, you should pay attention to it and say, has this been done well or not? So the AC30C series and 15C series, I like those amps. They have EL84s on a PCB, but they are very well mounted to the chassis as well, and the PCB is separate, and the design's pretty good. The Surge Ombre and some of the Freemans in the Runt series have separate boards for the power tubes mounted on sockets, but they have, I've seen them and I've inspected them, and the traces used and the way everything's connected are probably going to have no issues down the road. But there are a lot of amps where everything's just slapped together on one big board and no acknowledgement has been made that there's greater heat here, there's greater current here, and things can go wrong. And if it were to fail, where would it fail and how would it fail? Would it fail gracefully? You want to have some air around your screen grid resistors, etc. So it's not just chassis good, PCB bad, but there are principles that you have to observe and think about. Thoughts on the newest high watts? I've only seen the cheapest newest high watts, which do not deserve the label, but I've not seen everything that they make. So I hope that their higher end stuff is great. Thanks for the super chat, Audacious Ace. But notice I already answered your question. Please, 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 please. Super chats are not necessary for me to answer your question. I do appreciate them. But if you ask a question and I haven't answered it yet, stay tuned or look where you are in the chat. You'll notice I answer them in the order that they're asked. So it takes me a while to get to them. But I don't require bribes. I do appreciate the extra support, though. Hey, Alex Aguado, thank you very much. He ordered replacement AX7s for his Runt 20 from an online vendor, and they had $1 or so upcharge for high gain. Yeah, like Tube Depot does that, because they'll sort it out and say, all right, well, these are matched triodes, there's a certain price for matching them, or these are tested to be low microphonics, or these are tested to be high gain, because 12AX7s come in a wide range of tolerances. Nominally they have a gain factor of 100, but anything from about 80 to about 120 in terms of gain factors is within tolerance. So it's nice to say, well, for this amp I want to have high gain, and this one's 105 and 109 per triode. That's a high gain tube. Oh, this one, it's really important to me that it be as quiet and as low microphonics as possible. And you can combine them. You can say, I want a quiet, low noise, low microphonics, high gain tube. And because of my weirdness, I want them to be matched triodes. And so you pay $2 here, $1.50 there, $3 there. And they'll go through their stuff and sort out and find it for you. Yeah. Okay. To the audio clipping now. I have no experience with the new PCB Bad Cat amps, Steve Koo. I hope that they are good. I have had a lot of experience with the old hand-wired Bad Cats, which I thought the wiring was insane and not in a good way. And they had inherited many of the same flaws and problems, systemic, predictable problems as Matchless. But I've heard that they have a new engineer who's doing great work. I have not met him or her or had any interactions with them or seen their work, but I have heard good things, and I hope that they are all true. Yeah, like Brad, I don't much care how many people online say, oh, poke and pray is fine. I see it fail all the time. People love to argue with things I say in the videos about, oh, the Blues Junior nukes its output tubes, or the Hot Rod DeVille likes to burn this section of the board, because they say, well, I've never had a problem with mine. Well, that's great. But when I've had 50 of the same model and all 50 have the same problem, and it's always the same problem, I've got a better view of the problem than others. And a lot of people who do what I do and what Brad does aren't very good at it. I don't know. I don't want to disparage everyone or paint everyone with the same cloth, but there are a lot of guys working in the back of music stores with internet access and a pencil iron, just making shit up as they go along. That's probably all I need to say about that. Alex Aguado, it's going to depend on the vendor. If it's Tube Depot, they actually do sort it. It's a real thing. Whether it's of noticeable benefit to you is more debatable, but that's there's a demand for it, and they supply that demand. And for some cases, it can be very important to say, I really need to have this, or I need to have that. But it's not taking advantage of the user, because you can order unsorted preamp tubes and not pay any extra, and you might get some really good ones, but you don't have the same guarantee. And even with the guaranteed ones, they may be perfect for 6 weeks, and then all of a sudden the tube begins to change. Tubes are glorified light bulbs, and you never know. You just never know. Is the post-phase inverter master volume mod very difficult to do on a Vox AC30C2? It depends on who's doing it and what your level of experience with. I'll tell you this, Scott M. In stock form, it's got a crossline master volume with a 500 meg audio taper pot, and if you have the skills to do the full master volume mod on that amp, you would also have the skills to remove that 500K audio taper pot and put in a 1 meg audio taper pot, which means that you're going to have, at 1 meg, you're going to have no interaction between the two sides. You're going to get the full output of a non-master volume AC30. There's always a little bit of attenuation with the 500 audio. And then you could turn it down from there, and it's good enough for most people. You have to cut a lot of traces and interrupt a lot of traces. I would think that anyone who's capable of doing that mod well on an AC30C2 would not need my advice on how to do it, because they could look at the schematic, and they could look at the for the circuit, the master volume circuit. They could look at the schematic for the amp, flip it over, look at the board, know just what to do. And anyone who needs step by step from at that point should not be working on PCB amps. It's once you fuck up a trace, once you burn a pad off, it's a slippery slope. I would suggest don't do it. But the cross line is quite good. I just think they should have used a 1 meg versus a 500K. The trade-off is with the 1 meg, you won't have any change till about 2 o'clock, but it's out of the circuit when it's at on 10. Oh, I don't want to get into Dylan Talks tone with his giant hats, JDS. So let's see. I see so many tack solder things come in here, but I changed them. The tack soldering stuff tack solder stuff that comes in does not go out. Let's see. Looking for a chassis knockout punch kit. Greenlee's is the standard. I don't have any recommendations beyond that. I mean, Greenlee is so expensive. The best advice I can give you is look for estate sales and garage sales, because you can find a whole Greenlee kit for $30 somewhere. Whereas if you buy the thing at this brand new, that's $300-400. That's the thing about Greenlee punches. There's tons of them out there. They don't fail. They don't wear out. So see if you can find, it may take you some time to get them together, but it's best to buy used, especially from someone who doesn't know what they are at estate sales and such. And depending on where you are, I don't know whether you have estate sales or garage sales or car boot sales. Let's see. Lucas McDonald, has it red plated with the oscillator grounded? Well, an oscillator could be putting some stuff, throwing some nasties towards the output circuit. I would really want to look at your decoupling, stage decoupling, and what node that oscillator is connected to. Make sure you didn't connect it to the wrong node. I don't mean to suggest that you made a mistake, but it's possible. Or it could be that one wire is just too close to another wire and it's sensitive, and so you're putting that throb onto something that really does not need to have that throb on it. So play around with lead dress and triple check your work, and let us know if you find what the cause was. That's really odd. Oh, I was given the duck. I don't know how to source the duck. I'm sure they're out there. Hey, Steve Lark, I wouldn't if you got a basement 10, I wouldn't mess with adding a tube rectifier. You'd have to change the entire power transformer for that, aside from needing to put out a big octal. And I'm not sure there's even any point in adding the preamp tubes. So if you do the preamp tubes, you could probably do a hole punch for the 3/4 inch holes. But given how many reverb pedals are in the world these days, I would just make the Basement 10 sound as good as it's possible to sound. It's a really nice sounding, clean pedal platform, and then use a pedal. But you won't get any real benefit from putting in a tube rectifier, that's for sure. Way better just to build a super reverb kit than to change a Basement 10, in my opinion. I always forget to say that. Nikki always gets on me for not clarifying. Oh, in your opinion? Well, yeah, it's my opinion. That's why I fucking said it. I'm the one who said it's my opinion. I didn't say Harry said. Harry thinks. I'm like, anyway. Let's see. Any thoughts as to why the vibrato channel on AB 763 Super... Any thoughts as to why the vibrato channel on an AB763 Super Reverb would have significantly less output as compared to the normal channel? See, me talk really good. It could be a lot of reasons. Could be a weak tube in V2 or V4. Could be a bad mix resistor. Could be a bad plate resistor. Just bad cathode resistor. Just way too many things it could be. But I would start with just swapping tubes around. It's going to be something findable. Just go stage by stage. Hey, Colin Buxton. I don't have an opinion on the quality and utility of an Orange CS50 as I don't remember what that model is. I've had some Orange amps in the past. I don't remember what they were called other than I've had a couple of the big ones. I don't remember what that's called now. Oranges are okay. I'm not a huge fan of them. I don't dislike them. I don't have huge criticisms of them. They're just kind of, I don't know, Nissan Sentras, or they exist. Occasionally I'm aware that they exist, but I don't think about them very much. I don't mean to be mean, but I just... what is my opinion of the H&K Triamp? Unless you have a very large budget, I would avoid Hughes & Kettner. They're very convoluted, very expensive to have serviced. Parts are a nightmare, and they sound okay. They're trying to do everything. They're trying to be an all-in-one amp, and for that money, I'd rather just go fractal or have 4 different amps in a complicated rig switcher system than to try to get all out of one. Advu or Adval, I'm sorry. Yeah, the Supro King 8 does not sound very good, and I can take a terrible amp and make it sound fantastic. Here, if I were to do a video on it and wanted to upsell you on it, but what it really sounds like is what it sounds like to you. I'm sorry. Thanks, Jeremy. That's very kind of you. Appreciate that. Let's see. I have no thoughts on Joyo amps or Joyo anything other than they're going to go in the landfill fairly soon either way. Hey, Cash Shadow, Basement 50s from the 70s for 1K euro. Assuming it sounds good. Is that track? Thanks for all the knowledge. Here in Memphis, that's a Basement 50 for 1K is about the same in euros or dollars. That seems a little bit high here, but I think they're more common here. So I would think $700 to $800 here. But that's just the crazy market. It's a very good amp, and it would cost me $3,000 to build a Basement 50 from scratch, in terms of the transformers and the chassis and all the components and everything. Yeah, so it's a really good sounding amp. It'll continue to work for decades and decades. And if it's in good shape, I think you did well. I think it's just on the high end for a U.S. price for that model. Good, Matthew. I didn't know that the Jet City did change it because I had the fake jewel and the ones that had come in one case, the wires twisted and shorted and blew the power transformer. Is there a good low volume amp? Yes. A Vibrochamp, a Princeton, an AC15 with the volume turned down, at the higher end of the Swart Atomic Space Tone. These are all fantastic low volume amps. But the Tone King, not the Tone King, sorry, what's the one that you have there? I can't remember even the name of it. The Supros. Avoid a Supro anything. All the Supros are bad, and I'm sorry. Avoid the Pro Junior like the plague. Names some good solid state amps in my esteemed opinion. My favorite have been PV. Hey, Hart, you see me sitting around with all these very valuable vintage amps. I don't own any of them. So I'm not saying you have to spend a ton of money for things. I'm a big promoter of the AC-15. If you're really on a budget and you just want to go to the store today and buy something, I think you could do a lot worse than buying a 50-watt Boss Katana. I could certainly make music with a Katana and not think, oh, this sucks. As far as really great solid-state amps, let's take bass amps out of the equation because I think solid-state is better for bass than it is for guitar. There's a lot of PVs from the 80s and 90s, which are really good. You probably have one. Some of the stuff from the late 70s has been really cool. Some of them are solid state, some of them are hybrid, tube and solid state. It's just that, and I've heard great things about the Blues Cube from Roland and all these things. It's just that for my money, solid state, you have to spend a considerable amount to make it really sound as good as tube, a less expensive tube amp. And with solid state, you really want to have about twice the power that you think you need, because when you hit the max level in a solid state amp, it sounds terrible. You hit the max level in a tube amp, it sounds pleasant. So you want like twice the wattage to gig with solid state as you would need with tube. And so it gets expensive, or traditionally used to get expensive. Now you have to watch out now for all the Class D stuff, which gets around that by giving lots of output for very little money, but they're not reliable. But there have been so many of the 80s and 90s PV solid state was really good. Marshall had some good valve state stuff. And Radiohead's doing just fine with the Fender Stage 185 to this day. But because I don't repair many solid state amps, because they're typically not worth it, they're typically not worth the cost of repair because they used transistors that have not been made in 30 years. And so it gets very expensive to keep them going. I don't have a wide range of experience with all of them the way I do with the tube models, which are infinitely more repairable and much more worth that investment in repair. But I've certainly played a lot of solid state amps in my time. In fact, the last amp that I owned was a solid state. I had a Vox ADT 120 VT, whatever it was called, the big modeling AC30 thing with the blue. And it was a really nice sounding amp on 3 of the models. 3 of the models sounded great. The others sounded like ass. But those 3 were the ones I used. So it was a boutique. It was the Blackface Fender and the Vox for some reason. The Vox got that pretty well. But again, 120 watts. Brad's gotten some bad cat information, or some good bad cat information. Yikes! If I were to write a tell-all book about the amp industry, how shocking would the tales be from 1 to 10? I don't know. I'm not the guy to ask about that. I would talk to John Suhr. The guy to talk to is Richie Fliegler, who was at Marshall and Fender back in the 80s and 90s, and he's, I don't have all the dirt. I see, I'm the forensics guy. I get the body, and I say, well, this is what the most likely cause of death was, and it's been dead for about 24 hours or 24 years, whatever the case may be, or the amp company in question. But I'm not in the room where it happens, so to speak. Hey, Jorge. Bought a new custom shop Fender 5E3 before hearing my thoughts. What improvements would I do if I were to keep it? It's not a bad amp. Like I said earlier about the other 57 Classic thing, it's not a bad amp. It's they charge a lot more than I think it's worth. I think they tell you how good it is, but it's not that great in the way it's built. But if you don't have any problems with it, you don't have any problems with it. It's a good sounding circuit. live with it for 6 weeks and see if you like the sound. If you like the sound, great. If not, return it and get something else. I think it's one of the more expensive ways to get that particular sound. And, I say this as a guy who's restored a lot of the actual 50s and just had a 59 and day before yesterday. Doesn't really have the magic. And Victorias are close to having the magic. I think the Fender is not quite there. But, it's a good amp, even if it doesn't sound as good as a 58, 59, 57 example, which is a high bar. Let's see. Scrolling down to find some more questions. Hey, Joseph. Hi from Belgium. We're hoping to go to Belgium next year. Belgium and the Netherlands. I'm glad you enjoyed the review. Yeah, I think if it does the sounds you're looking for, the Ombre is fantastic. I think the Ombre does one or two tricks really, really well, but it's not as versatile as, say, the Deluxe Reverb, just as the 62 Fender Deluxe was not as versatile as the 64 Deluxe. That's why they changed it. But I think that the Sir Ombre, like the 62 Deluxe, does those particular sounds it does really, really well, and it's really well built. So yes, I would totally recommend it if the sounds work for you. So try one. You'll know pretty quickly if it does the thing that you need it to do. I would say that a Deluxe Reverb reissue or the Sir Bella with some overdrive pedals might get you in a similar place, but then you have other options. So try them all out. And the Sir Badger is another one to check out, which also is a little bit more versatile than the Ombre. I think it's interesting that John made the Ombre, which is a very focused, this does this thing. And it does it really well, but it doesn't do this other thing or this other thing or this other thing. And it takes a lot of confidence in a product to come out with it like that. And I respect that. See you, Andy. Of course, I'm saying this probably 20 minutes after he actually left. Oh, Burns Night is coming up, Martin. Nice. We were walking... Nikki and I I hope you're still here, Martin, to hear this. Nikki and I were walking from Westminster Abbey to the Tate Britain. So we're walking on the north bank of the Thames, going upriver. And just as we left Westminster Abbey, and there's the Jewel Tower there, and there's a little patch of sidewalk with a little overgrown patch of weeds and flowers to the right, and there was this tiny little mouse there, just kind of shivering in the sun. I think it was probably ill, but I did the whole "wee slicket timorous creature" bit, so I'll be sure to give Mr. Burns a toast as well. I should have popped this up on the screen for that. Hath no need to be so hasty. Forgive me for that. Let's see. Do I like 65 amps? Whatever happened to them? I've had a few in. They were well built. I had a couple of the Londons. They had a couple of mistakes in them. Certain things that were a little bit noisier than they could have been, which I fixed. I'm not sure what happened to them because they looked like they were just poised to conquer the world, and then all of a sudden they're just gone. The website disappeared, which was very strange. And if I ever get to meet Dan Buell, I'll ask him about that. But I did like their products very much, and they had some that were really fantastic. Let's see. Scrolling down to the next questions. Thanks, Clyde. Appreciate that. Do I know anything about Tyler Ampworks? Looking at a Princeton clone. Yeah, the Tyler Ampworks are a scam. They're made in U.S. Princeton's are they have them made for them by Seritone, and they put their Tyler badge on them. Actually, that's not quite fair. I've had 2 different Tyler Princetons in, both of which claim to be made in U.S., made in America, go U.S., lots of Bible quotes and U.S. quotes and U.S. yes, go America, fuck yeah, stuff on the website. One of which was a really crappily assembled Weber kit, all Chinese stuff, built by someone who never built an amp before. The other one was quite fantastic, but it was a Seritone. It was made by Seritone, had Seritone everything in it. It said Tyler on the front and was sold to you for $200 more than you get the same amp from Seritone, and said made in U.S. So fuck that. If you want an inexpensive, good Princeton, don't give Tyler a dime. Go ahead and buy the Seritone and have it proudly made in Malaysia, which it really is. What does it say? Patriotism is the last refuge of scoundrels. Let's see. Parlance Electric Company says, I parked my old 2000 Victoria 35 310T when I bought a new AC15 with Alnica Blue, straight into normal with my PRS DGT 2012 and 3 pedals, years of fooling around gone to history. I take it that means you like the new AC15. Yeah, but Dustin, a lot of the pedal steel guys are still doing the Nashville and the Nashville 400, which are painfully present transients. They'll get you, but they are great for that. Hey, yeah, 470K is good. I'll go up as high as a 1 meg without seemingly to add any noise from it. 470K to 1 meg is the way to go. I'll typically go 470K though, because a little bit safer. Martin, no. You have nothing to apologize for. It's such a odd place we find ourselves. We're gonna need. You're gonna have to pass that dram down here, man. Yeah, Class D amps could be made fantastic, but no one wants to pay for it because their competition costs $100. So, the Bandit Redline Trans Tube. Yeah, those are the things I forgot the names of. Yeah, I had the Valvetronics. I had the big 120 watt version, but the Valvetronics are quite good for the price, which is, especially on the used market these days, almost nothing. Let's see. Holy cow, I'm caught up. I'm actually caught up. All right, Hucky Bridge says the new engineer at Bad Cat is Peter Ahrens, and the newest returning engineer is Mark Sampson, or Swampson, as Hucky calls him. Peter Ahrens is the guy that I've heard so many good things about, and I've got disagreements with Mr. Sampson about best practices, but he's certainly sold a lot more hot boxes than I have. I liked the Little Elvis, Steve Lark. Little Elvis was a nice little amp, and I saw Elvis Costello and the Imposters play here at the High Tone in Memphis 20 years ago. They did 2 gigs for Friday and Saturday. There's a DVD out there of them doing that. They did the video the second night where Emily Lou Harris was there, but I was there the first night. But he just had a little Elvis, and he sounded great. A couple of years later, when I did his work for the tour he was doing, the record he was doing, he had 2 deluxe reverb reissues and an old 56, I believe, 5E3, and a Vox AC15 hand-wired. And all the solder joints on the input jacks of his Fenders were broken, but I fixed those. and it's I don't remember what something was wonky inside the 56 Deluxe. The funny thing about that, I had to fix it on the floor of the studio where they were rehearsing because that amp did not leave the tour manager. The tour manager took that amp and the jazz master with him in row cases everywhere they went. So I couldn't, all the other amps I brought back to my shop and then brought back to the studio, but that amp I had to fix on the floor of the studio in like a 10-minute break that they were taking. But I was able to do it. Special 130, good amp. Rose amplification. You picked up a Dumble. I don't think you. I don't think you need, if you got it, you don't need my opinion on it. Yeah, it's a good amp, and it is very much derived from a basement circuit where they just repurpose the extra gain stages. Yeah, they're good amps. They won't make you sound like Stevie Ray, but they'll make you sound like yourself. Dumble's definitely best over $100,000 US amps available. Yeah, the category of of Dumble. I don't know, Dumble versus Trainwreck. That's what you're talking about, and how many angels can dance on a pinhead. Oh, Nick Romy, any son. Good luck to you. Make sure that every single electrolytic in that amp has been changed out, and they've got so many. So just change out all the electrolytics and make sure the grounds are all good, because the grounds are usually not all good in Suns, and good luck to you. I'm not a big fan of converting PA amps to guitar amps. There's so many guitar amps in the world already. Current production 6v6s, which are good these days. Sean, I'm using the Electro Harmonics, which seem to be the best of a bad bunch right now, but that could change 6 weeks from now. So we'll see how they go. Hey, Gooden. Yeah, the lab series were great, but man, some of those parts are unobtainium, and if that compressor chip ever goes out on you, it's a very expensive paperweight. Just so many things are so many solid state things have not been made since the world moved on from great big transistors. It's just the way of the world. It's amazing that tubes are still made. I have never worked on a Bob Reinhardt amp. I don't know anything about a Bob Reinhardt, but I hope he makes great amps. Do I service 30th anniversary Marshalls? I would normally, but I am so my dance card is so full right now that that I would not be able to take it for probably 6 months, and I don't want to do that to you. Colin Buxton, I don't know what a PS100 is versus a PS2A. I'm sorry. I'm glad your dad gave you that bloody valve tester, because that'll make your life a lot easier. I have not tried the JJ double micas yet. Brad has and was less than impressed. I think the ultralinear Silverface 135 super reverbs and twin reverbs, all those big things, are really good amps. I think if you're going for that Jerry Garcia kind of sound, it is the best choice. But for a lot of other people, it's going to be really too clean and too harsh. But play around with it. I think it's a very good amp, but it's a very specific sound. I think if you're trying to do like Jerry Reed stuff, it's just a godsend. If you're doing Jerry Garcia stuff, it's amazing. Maybe some John McLaughlin kind of stuff. It's big, loud, clean. Hey, Jim McGraw, thanks for asking. The bathroom project is going really well, and I'll have a video soon. I've got all the new floor joists installed, and I've got the drains and vents installed for the toilet and sink. And tonight or tomorrow, I'll be doing the drains and the vent started for the bath. And I've got the first layer of subfloor, which is 5/16 inch ply, cut out into 4 sections and all laid out like a jigsaw. So I've got 1/8 inch gap all the way around each one. And I can move them up and get underneath them as necessary. So I've got to locate where the drain for the tub's going to go. And then once that's all done, then I'm going to run HVAC. And I ordered a register, which I, in theory, could run into the wall rather than the floor. So I could have the duct register coming out of the wall rather than the floor, which is nicer in the bathroom. I'll find out tomorrow whether I can do that or whether it would carve up too much wood structurally, and then so I have to do it on the floor. Either way, at that point, whether I do the wall or the floor register, I'll do the HVAC run to the rest of the house. And then I've got to do the hot and cold supplies. And once all that's done, then I've got to put some strapping beneath the floor joist so that I can get in some rock wool insulation. And then I can glue and screw down the first layer of subfloor. Then I can cut the 3/4 inch rosin impregnated what do you call it, Advantech stuff, which will be the actual subfloor that'll take the real floor. And at that point, it's time to do electrical outlets, and then it's time to fix up insulation, make sure that I don't need to do any adjustment for stud thicknesses. Then I've got to do some stud repair on one wall and cut the window frame down a bit, and then it'll be time for drywall. So, and then eventually I'll get it done. But I'm making good progress. I think we are pretty much at the end. So, yeah, I think it's about time to wrap this up. I have no thoughts on Benson amps or Brian Sauer's transformers. Ryan, sorry. Man. Just making sure I didn't miss anything here. All right, Jeffrey Parker. We've got a 3 humbucker Les Paul. Want to put the middle pickup on a push-pull pot and wire it directly to the output jack. Yeah, just give it a 500K or 470K resistor to ground. Otherwise, it'll be really bright. That'll knock it down just the right amount. Enjoy that. That should do it. So let me go to the thing where I always forget to do. I'm supposed to do this one. And then, let's see. Come on. There it goes. Any thoughts on Chris Marin Transformers? Really fantastic Transformers. Doesn't always reply to emails, but then I'm guilty of that as well. But he knows his stuff very well, and they're fantastic. I hope you all have a good week. I'll have some more amp videos coming soon, and a bathroom update for the 10 of you who like that kind of thing. And I appreciate you all joining me on these Saturdays. And Martin, lift a glass for me, and I'll see you on Burns Night. Bye.